So Tori and I have been friends since high school. I'll never forget the first day I met you. I was sitting at the back of the class and Tori was at the front of the class. And what wasn't most memorable is that her feet didn't touch the ground.
Oh my gosh. That's the most memorable thing.
Her iconic fashionable
Not
loafers.
my swollen cheeks. Remember, I was getting my my wisdom teeth out.
No, my eyes were on. What color were those Todd loafers?
Oh my gosh.
They were
black,
like, no, they were colored. There was like a fuchsia pair or a blue pair. Anyways, I just knew you were my human and it was just too cute. So Tori and I met in high school. And what I've loved about our friendship is one, watching you grow as a businesswoman, as an entrepreneur, and it's really even funny to talk about kind of the influencing industry as entrepreneurial, but I think it's worth why this conversation is so interesting is you've seen it since the beginning. Mm-hmm. You were an influencer before influencing was influencing. Like we didn't even have a term for what you were really doing back in high school. And keep in mind, we do look really great for our age, but this was like almost 10 years ago. And it was really interesting. It was really new. I didn't really quite understand at the time what you were doing. Like even kind of making money off of Instagram was really new. And then I will let you kind of introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tori Webster. I'm a content creator full time. I'm also a creative consultant for a ton of global brands and a very keen and happy marketer in the digital space. You're right. I, at the time on Instagram, wasn't even making money, honestly. I didn't monetize my channel until, I want to say this correctly, I think it was 2014. So that would have been my first year of university is when I think, got my first paycheck.
Oh, cool.
I always talk about this because I think it's interesting. Scotiabank was actually my first client.
Oh, cool.
And I think that's a weird kind of key point because in some ways, I think you would think the banks would have been the last to adopt that model, but maybe because they had budgets to play with and it was such a green, new, exciting landscape, they really dove into it. And I'll never forget the first offer I got was actually a multi-deal package, which I also thought was, I mean, looking back, seems really interesting because it obviously then turned into a very different industry. It became very transactional. It became very one-off posts. But I always go back to that original offer and I think, wow, so interesting. Corporate client, like multi-use. It was videos, photos, and it was a long-term like monthly partnership. So very, very odd kind of in the grand scheme of the career. But that was kind of the first time I monetized the channel and I thought, oh, wow, I can turn this into a business. So,
and I think it's really interesting just for those who don't know about your story, how that transition happened, right? Yeah. From being on leading a TV show to going into kind of influencing. Do you want to just quickly chat about that?
Sometimes I think going from being an actor to an influencer is actually the most challenging pivot I've had to do, and there's a few reasons. And I've only just started to be retrospective and reflective of this, but I think the first is that because I'm a storyteller as an actor through other people's words, I have been challenged in more recent years as an influencer, feeling like all the opinions and storytelling is coming from me. And I think that I have this great, I have this great love for Smartlist, the podcast, and Bono was a guest and he said something that I related to so much. And he said, you know, I've not noticed it until I was later in life, but I very much have a telephone voice. Like when I'm on stage, Bono becomes Bono. And I kind of relate to that. And I think that that's maybe a bit of my acting background is I've been able to sort of mask like what influencer is and wear that online. But I've realized it's been really challenging now competing with the Gen Zs of the world who are so open and so raw. And we've talked about this. There's an extreme need to show up as your most authentic self. And because my little acting gig is always somewhere inside of me bubbling out, I feel like Tori as an influencer and Tori as a person, though very much like the same vibe and energy, I've created two distinct lines between the two.
Because it's your job.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I think that that's why I'm really excited for this conversation is like, this is your job.
Totally.
And that, it's such a glamorous, and I kind of want to get behind the glamour because you work so hard, tirelessly to create content, provide deliverables, and run your business, right? Which is the Tori Webster brand. But it's at the heart of it, it's a job. And I think that the glamour and kind of the outside looking in opinion of influencing or content creating. And I think it's probably, very quick differentiator. Do you see yourself as a content creator instead of an influencer?
I don't hate the word influencer. I think there used to be a really negative connotation towards the word, but I think if this is what we're doing in this space and we're storytelling and creating content on the daily, I think the word is interchangeable. And I always kind of get my nose out of joint when influencers or creators hate the word influencer. I mean, look, if we want to rebrand, we can call ourselves storytellers or content creators, but either way, like, none of it sounds fabulous. We're creative consultants, we're editors, we're producers, we're stylists.
Yeah, we're all the hats.
How many things am I doing in a day? So if there's an overarching umbrella term and it has to be influencer, I guess I'm wearing the hat.
Yeah, you don't hate it. So Tori started as an actress. You were the lead on
a TV show called Life with Boys.
Life with Boys. Your name was Tess on the show.
It was.
And it was a really popular show in North America, right?
Totally.
It was probably even bigger in the States.
Show.
Yeah, it was huge. So it was a really big show. You transitioned. So you got out of that show. When did that show end?
2013.
So pretty close to when you transitioned into content creating or influencing. So then you kind of had a whole bunch of followers when social media was
just
burgeoning. You transition into socials, and what did that, so you've kind of explained that you got your first partnership deal. It was really new. Was it new in Canada or totally new?
So new in Canada. We're talking like just beginning, like blossoming, like brands didn't even know what influencer meant. They didn't know what these packages meant. For example, at the time, 90% of my business in 2014 was coming from the US. There was no one in Canada activating.
But it was happening in the US.
Yes.
Okay.
And I mean, you know this, but I would say we're always about 2 to 3 years behind. So it was probably where influencer landed in Canada in about 2017, if that makes sense.
Which is so funny for anyone listening, because like Scotiabank is not seen here as like the thought leader bank of Canada. Okay. So how have you seen the industry change since 2014?
I mean,
10 years.
Incredible amount.
You've almost been influencer for 10 years. That's crazy.
Yeah, the landscape has changed an incredible amount. I think the biggest being its presence in Canada. I think now we're at a place where we're able to compete on a global stage, and I always get really excited when Canadian creators especially really take off on the platforms or get invited on the global trips. Those things are really exciting because it's showing all the amazing talent, not only coming out of Canada, but how we can make an impact on the global stage. So that's exciting. But the storytelling has changed so much. It used to be so photo driven, so Instagram driven. I mean, even Facebook at the time. Then it became Snapchat driven. Now it's TikTok driven. So it's really demanding for a creator to be super nimble. It's basically every quarter, let alone every year, reevaluating, hey, what's working? Hey, what's not? Where are we heading? When the pandemic hit, I was like, great, now I'm a TikToker. And it's getting a whole new audience base on a brand new platform, starting all over from scratch, which is amazing every step of the way. You're always kind of leveling up, I guess, and getting more creative of how you can talk to a new audience. But it's changed an incredible amount.
There's two things I want to get back to on that, but TikTok was really interesting even for our friendship.
Totally.
Because I remember when everyone was just talking about this new TikTok platform during the pandemic, and I would go on it and I felt too old. Like I was overwhelmed by what was going on this platform, and you just were like, I don't have a choice. Like I'm going all in. And this was before 100%. It was monetized. This was like when people really weren't. It wasn't what it is now, where it's it's seen as like akin or greater to
it
Instagram.
Was pandemic entertainment. Let's be real. That's what it was. Everyone was just scrolling from sitting on their couch, but I guess the difference, and I think this is what differentiates a long-term creator, someone that wants to exist in this space beyond just a moment in time, and just someone who's in it for like the transactional post. I think that creators that want to be storytellers and actually live for those stories are going to get excited when these new platforms came out. For me, I thought, wow, this is the first opportunity where I can be way more video driven without getting into the YouTube space. Short form video, which felt way more welcoming than long form. I mean, like the editing that's involved in that felt overwhelming from the beginning. So I thought, wow, this is really a great fit. I can show my personality. I can have quick tidbits. I can, teach an audience new things. I've been relying relying on photos for so long. Let's shift and use some of my personality to do something else. But I don't think every creator has that necessarily ability to cross-platform and cross-promote because it requires a whole bunch of different skills. I guess I was just lucky I had the acting background.
And you can do it yourself.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, you were literally doing videos every single day tirelessly, and you weren't monetizing it. And this is at a time, this is an interesting point, because you were making a lot of money off of Instagram. So to take time and focus away from a platform that was working to kind of see ahead where you knew where people were going was interesting and ahead of the curve. And I remember saying to him, like, I'm so overwhelmed. I don't go on it for a week, and like the whole world has changed in TikTok because this was during the salmon bowl craze.
100%.
And you were the one that taught me. You're like, well, what's going on in this app? And TikTok reached out to you, like you've worked with them globally, that the best way to thrive is to own your own niche by leveraging a trend.
Totally.
So if you're a ballerina dancer, make a salmon bowl in your point shoes. Like lean into your niche, but kind of use a viral trend.
Absolutely.
Because TikTok rewards creativity and and engaging content. The another question I have for you, based off of you kind of talking about where influencing has gone, do you feel that the power is now more in the creator's hand? Like you have more freedom to exercise your brand? Or do you feel it's more forced?
I do. I think I have creative freedom that I didn't necessarily have back in. It's funny. In 2014, I had a lot of freedom. It's almost gone through waves. When it first started, because brands were throwing things at the wall to see what stuck, it felt like briefs back then were pretty loose. It was like, here's our tag and here's maybe a hashtag. But beyond that, like, we trust you to kind of come up with the content. Then we almost went backwards, I would say, in the years of like, in the peaks of like 2017, 2018 of Instagram, the peaks of Instagram, it felt really stringent. It was like, this is what works and this is what everyone's going to do, and a bit copy paste and a little bit really strict briefs and really strict outlines. And I would argue with agencies because I'd say, you are writing these briefs, but you are not the people bringing this content to life. So bring influencers in from the ideation stage. Let's talk about how someone's actually going to take this from words on a page to a video that's actually going to go viral or create any type of conversion for your brand. So I think with those challenges over the years, it's shifted in the right direction. I think agencies and brands collectively are getting a little bit more creative and nimble when it comes to trusting the influencers that they're working with. Otherwise, why hire us?
No, I mean, like, thinking about it, why wouldn't you bring them in earlier in the conversation, especially when
you'd be surprised. Agencies and brands typically don't.
They don't, but it's like it makes actually perfect sense, especially if you're actually tying a campaign to tangible goals, whether that be monetary, whether that be like engagement or eyeballs or follower count. Like if you're actually leveraging these humans and what they've built, use their intellectual capital. Like they know what they're doing. They understand humans.
They're so scared. I think corporate companies, and I see this more than ever, are really freaked out when it comes to taking a risk on these platforms. And I challenge in my consulting role brands to really let go. I think they get scared of the legal repercussions. I think they're unfortunately not timely on the platform when it comes to trends, and they're very reactive versus being proactive. They're not on top of what's coming next. They're always a little bit behind the eight ball and trying to catch up and trying to stay relevant because they are fearful of the consumer. And I don't know, in my head, and I'm sure you agree with this, it's like shift the narrative, like get on top of it, be the brand that's like commenting that first comment and being super witty and being really fun and getting all those upvotes and creating all this organic love for your brand that doesn't even exist.
No, totally. And I think like even working with a partnership, and we'll get more into that in this conversation, but having a mandate, but allowing their skill set in creating engaging content that gets likes, views, engagement, clicks, etc., like allowing them to have that power. Because if your mandate is, you're promoting X, but something crazy happened the day before, or something like, the Oscars is coming, and you tie their product to something that's trending, they should want that freedom, because that makes your product or what you're doing for them way more valuable, because it ties it to the zeitgeist. Like it makes it relevant.
Yeah.
So, okay. So what is the biggest lessons learned that you've experienced as an influencer? And let's maybe start on the influencer side, like for influencers.
I think, I mean, listen, it's a work in progress, especially when you can't have a ton of mentors in the space because the business is so new and because the industry is so new. I've been lucky that I've been able to have friends with I've been friends with content creators, so I've had people I've been able to lean on and trust, but a lot of it is trial and error. I can use an example where I really realized how important a contract is, and that's when my name and likeness ended up in Times Square without my permission.
Oof.
I had a billboard in Times Square with a very large corporate brand that did not have the approval to like leverage my name, photo, or likeness in that way. And it's a double standard, right? Because a brand's going to turn around and say, yeah, but you ended up in Times Square, isn't that so great? And I'm saying, yeah, but show me the money. You took my name and likeness out of context. This was an Instagram photo. I didn't even give you the highest res version of what this photo is. Like, so what is this looking like blown up in a Times Square version of the photo? But anyways, that's when I kind of went back to the drawing board and I said, okay, I think usage, name, and likeness is a really big piece of my contracts. I need to make sure that this is really set in stone before I agree to my partnerships. And again, I think a lot of creators obviously know this now, but we're talking like the 2014s when I didn't necessarily have that insight and I didn't know what those, boundaries were in the industry. Happy to say I was paid out in the end for my name and likeness, and they sorted it accordingly, but that was like a shock factor moment for sure.
Well, it's crazy as an influencer to be just like a human selling your humanness.
Totally.
And then getting into like a relationship or an engagement with what is really a faceless organization, right? And you're meeting someone and you want to think that they have the best interest, but like how important contracts are for you as a person and protecting you. How did you learn to write better contracts for yourself?
Yeah, again, trial and error. I mean, now I know the things to look for in a contract that are just sort of the red flags. Anything that ever says perpetuity, probably just run in the opposite direction. But I mean, for me, it's usage, it's name likeness, it's exclusivity, it's payment terms. All of those things are kind of what I'm looking at when I'm skimming a contract. And once you kind of, I mean, listen, we're not lawyers, but once you kind of understand the general setup, you kind of know what's there to help you and what's there to hurt you. And you can kind of fill in the blanks as you go. So now I'm in a place where I do all of my own on contracts, but I do really encourage young creators and people getting into it to seek legal advice and get counsel on that, because that's where you can seriously go wrong, especially with some of those bigger contracts with large corporate brands.
Do you find that there's either a variance in how you're treated or how this almost the seriousness that you treat kind of the levels of relationship or engagement? Like, I know that because you're an influencer and you have to stay relevant, you have different kinds of relationships with brands and businesses. Like, do you find that, is there ever a time that you don't do it with a contract?
Very rarely in 2023 will I do work without a contract. And I think that that's just because I've seen where things can go wrong, and you like to go into business thinking the best of people. But I think just to protect it, listen, a contract is great because what it's doing is protecting both parties. It's not a selfish act. It's not saying, hey, I'm coming into this and you need to sign my terms. It's saying, no, let's protect both of us here. For example, I'm working on something right now and I was the one that brought the contract forward, even though the confidentiality breach for them would have been way more intense. So it's, hey, I'm going to protect you here, but I'm also going to protect myself. So I think that's more the approach. So no, I think I approach most of my partnerships the same way. Obviously, if there's personal relationships involved, that's a little bit different. But I can genuinely say, even when I'm working with close friends who work in PR, we're still doing contracts back and forth. And I really appreciate that.
I think that's like a great rule of thumb. Even what I've learned in business on my side is make sure that it's clear. Put it on a paper. Like, even if you're like responding, you acknowledge it over email, like not needing it in my world, like necessarily hardcore signed, but just making sure we're communicating that we're on the same page, because your reputation is everything. And in the digital world, it's so quick for it to be ruined. I don't want to swear. Passed on. Separately, let's talk about kind of just like the gifting aspect. So how do you approach and deal with the everyday Christmas you experience, like, which is the best part of going to Tori's house, by the way.
Gifting has changed.
Oh, interesting.
A lot over the last, I'd say, it was probably the pandemic that created the biggest shift for the positive. There was a time in 2018, 2019 where I couldn't come home of a day and have less than 5 packages to pick up. And I mean this really from a grateful and genuine place. Not one person could use this amount of product. It's impossible. There's so many new lipsticks on the market. There's so many new moisturizers. And any creator will tell you this. The products they're excited to storytell around, create content about, share with their audience, they're organically chasing that anyways. If a Dior lip gloss is launching at Sephora, I'm on the wait list to get the lip gloss. I don't need to be chasing the brand. I already want to organically create a video about it. And I think brands started to realize that they needed to almost start asking permission to send that mail, because if they want that guaranteed coverage, they need to know that the influencer is excited to receive that package. So now I would say 99% of packages I receive, I get outreach a week or two before. A brand will say, hey, Valentino Beauty, for example, we have this latest beautiful perfume. Would you like to receive it and potentially share it with your audience? Amazing. Yes, sounds good. Here's my address. And that's now kind of the way it works. It's a lot less just unsolicited gifts, as I like to call it.
It was crazy.
And now it's more thoughtful positioning. Is this influencer potentially going to share this with their audience? And again, with no expectation. Like, there was also this time where, to your point, brands would send pieces and say, hey, we haven't seen your post yet. And I'm thinking, guys, my content calendar is a little overwhelming. I'm focused on sponsored partnerships right now. I can't promise every single brand that's sending me mail coverage. That's not fair either. Like, that's not how magazines worked back in the day. No. If we go back to comparing it to traditional media, it was editorial versus advertorial content. That's the same as an influencer's feed. Like, they're going to talk about editorial content. They're going to be paid to post about things. And then they're going to also be creating organic content and sharing that online.
And that's like, in my world, and why I wanted to have this conversation is there's at really any size, but like just to humor me, let's say kind of businesses that are starting out, or small to medium sized businesses that have done really well over the last few years that are constantly hearing about influencers, but don't really know how to navigate the space, don't really know what it means. They think it's just absolutely glamour. And why I wanted to have this conversation, to kind of break down what to expect when working with an influencer. I've seen so many clients that want to, purchase whatever it is to promote their business and brand, not sign contracts, not pay for guaranteed posting, and be pissed off that the influencer isn't so grateful for, a free gift, that they're just willing to just post about them, not just once on a story, but, every single day, perpetually, forever, to sell their brand and product. I think that needs education. And you talk about the feed, like, your feed is your business.
Absolutely.
Like, you take it seriously.
Yeah. And it's great in the sense that that example actually came from a PR maven that I really trust. And when she started in PR, it was only the magazines, right? So if we do look at that model and we look at how brands used to sponsor to show up in a Vogue, that is now how influencers are treating their Instagram feeds. We are the magazine when people are scrolling. So yeah, there needs to be a ton of organic content, the way that it would show up in a Pop Sugar or a Vogue, the things that are naturally exciting storytelling and the celebrity moments and all the fun. And then there's the way that the business is run, which is the paid content. And so I think if you're looking at it like that, you're realizing, okay, this is absolutely a business and it needs to be working at that standard. Like, we need to go as brands to influencers with very, very clear expectations as to what they're looking for out of a partnership. I challenge my clients. I say, is this an awareness play? Is this a conversion play? Why are we posting this? Like, is this in line with your strategy for the entire year? Or is this just a seasonal strategy? Like, what is this post doing for you? Is it supporting a larger message? Is it a key message that needs to go to a very targeted audience? And you would be surprised. I don't think a lot of clients even sometimes necessarily know the answer to that. They want to put, money towards a post and see it come to life. And they think that one post is going to create an immense wave on the internet and a ton of conversion. And I think where influencers need to be educating businesses and clients now, as well as agencies educating brands and clients now, is that one post is not going to move the needle for your brand. If this is not a 360 PR marketing approach with a ton of involvement beyond one creator, I'm sorry, stop putting your marketing dollars there.
Or if it does get a ton of attraction, it's probably not for
the right reasons.
The right reasons.
It's people sending, exactly.
But can you talk about the work that goes into an in-feed post? Like, talk about what your kind of your day looks like.
Totally.
Like, and how much planning goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, it starts even before that, in the sense that there's so much communication. I mean, to get a brand deal off the ground, I'd be lying if it wasn't at least 20 emails back and forth to even get a contract signed. Like, just understanding the scope, understanding the deliverables, aligning on the contract, doing the red lines. Then I get a brief. Then once I've reviewed the brief, then I'm going back and I'm going into now my creative brain. So now the business side is done. We're lined up on the deal. I'm going into my creative brain and saying, okay, now I've got to create a basically storyboard and or script that's usually pretty loose, but at least gives a brand, especially a corporate brand, an idea of what they're going to get. Because what, again, I've learned is like reshoots take a lot of time. So I try to avoid that at all costs. I'll do whatever I can up front to create less error on the back end for all parties involved. So a storyboard and a script will go to the brand. Once that's approved, I'm like, okay, now content creation time. So that's when we really wear every single hat. We're obviously the writers. We're obviously the producing our own content typically, or hiring an outside team of photographers and videographers. We're our own stylists. We're the talent in the actual photo or video. And then we actually have to bring the content to life. Then we head into post-production. And then we start the editing process, adding the copy, making sure all the captions are written out for multi-platforms. If it's going on TikTok and Instagram, you have 2 different captions for both. So everything has to be outlined in that way. And then presenting a bunch of different options for the client to review. Usually I use Google Docs, but every creator is different. But like aligning all the videos and all the photos and all the assets for them to review. Once the brand has then reviewed that, and then they can come back with feedback, potentially I need to reshoot or make edits or change copy or change voiceover or whatever that might be. Then once that's approved, then we can finally go live. Then we go into the invoicing stage, and then we go into the metrics stage, which is when we're going to obviously be sending all the analytics from the back end. How did this perform? What's the wrap-up report? And hopefully then jumping into the next campaign and working together again. Is that overwhelming?
Which is why this is a job.
Is that an overwhelming scope of work? Yeah.
It is. It is for when all that the end user sees is Tori posting nice content, right? And that's the conversation that I wanted to have, because it's a lot of work.
Don't you think any good creator, though, is making it look easy? I do think there's something to that, but I agree there's such a lack of education on the back end as to what's going into that piece of content.
Anyone that is great at what they do makes it look easy. And that's why you should get paid what you're worth, because you approach content creating as a professional. And that's the weirdest part about the industry from where I sit, is there is no standard. There is no barrier to entry. There's, now UGC has entered the conversation, which I want to talk about that too, but I think that they have different expectation and parameters that are lower. You've got micro, you've got macro, you've got, depending on, anyone can call themselves an influencer. And businesses are almost like mesmerized by this word, that they think that getting someone that's young that can post on socials will make their brand go viral, and they will therefore make them a lot of money, but they don't want to pay for it or do kind of the work to understand kind of what goes into it. So what do you think the biggest misconceptions are for working with an influencer?
Well, one, which we've already talked about, is that one post or one video will break the internet for your brand. But you'd be shocked to think, I think you'd be shocked. Well, you wouldn't, because you work on the back end, but I think most people go into it with that very small-minded approach.
All the time with clients.
It needs to...
All the time.
Yeah, it's just not going to work. And I mean, especially like when I chat with my friends in PR, they say, if you're not even sending it to 100 people, you're not even making a wave. Like, unfortunately or fortunately, this is a very saturated space now in 2023. So to really cut the noise, you have to be really strategic about who you're hiring. So like we talked about, who is that influencer that's right for your brand? Is it the micro? Is it the macro? Is it a mix of both? Is their target demo aligned with your brand? How active is their engagement? All of these things. And I don't think brands like to do the legwork to figure that out.
No. And it really, what's weird about the industry is unless you're working with the right strategic thinkers, it's very difficult to get to that nuance of who is Tori's audience?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do they really look like? Because you've got to go a few layers deeper. Like, it's not just looking at you and your age and what you look like and what you wear. By virtue of your past, like, you've got a lot of followers that are in different demographics, like our demographic, younger demographic, potentially older because of the younger kids that they're the moms that also watch the show. Like, you actually have to really know who you're working with and who's going to sell your product. And we see this so much in marketing. I even think this happened with Bud Light. Like, they didn't really get to know their content creator. And it's really important to know who's selling your product because they're selling your product. Like, it has to be done right. What do you think the biggest misconceptions are for on the business side?
From an expectation standpoint, you mean?
Or anything that you think that you fall into or you'd like people listening to know?
Well, I guess from the business side, the biggest misconception I guess the biggest misconception is that this isn't a job. Like, I guess that's the biggest challenge, is positioning influencer, to your point, as entrepreneurship and saying, I run my business from start to finish, and nobody sees that. Like, what they see is, to your point, the finished video or the finished photo. They don't see the hours I spend on a contract. They don't see the hours I spend on briefing calls, in like brainstorms with brands about, the future of the industry or whatever it might be. So I think it's just repositioning influencer and repositioning content creator as, business owners in the marketing space. And also, we just talked about this, but experts, like, even more than sometimes these super corporate agencies, they're chasing influencers now saying, so what's the strategy on TikTok? Are we using hashtags right now? And it's like, no, hashtags are irrelevant. Are we using trending sounds? No, not really. That's not really relevant on the platform right now. If you were actually on the platform, I think you'd naturally see that. But I guess that's the problem. Like, some of those agencies with a very corporate background are great at what they're great at. They're great at corporate copy. They're great at advertorial photo shoots. They're great at so many things. What they're not great at is, like, speaking directly to a consumer the way that influencers do every single day. Like, storytelling, honestly, baseline.
Well, even just how much you're on the platform, how much you use the platform. Like, it's so valuable to businesses. Like, one of the biggest emerging titles is Chief TikTok Officer at big companies.
That.
Yeah, because it's changing so quickly that it actually has to be almost a full-time job to do it properly.
100%.
How about value? Like, I think from on the agency side, what I struggle with is I'll be working with a really cool client. Mm-hmm. And although that they think that their product is so cool that influencers should just be lining up out the door to give them free work, it's very difficult for me to manage client expectations because their absolute misunderstanding of the industry and the black boxness of influencing makes it very difficult for me to broker and to set up clear expectations of what an influencer is going to expect. What advice, although that's vague and broad, do you have rate cards? Do you have standards or kind of rules of thumb that you enter into partnerships?
I start by asking this. Would you work for free?
No.
Why is the expectation that influencers should work for free? This I've never understood.
Me neither.
No one would show up to their 9 to 5 if they were being paid $0.
No.
Why would an influencer take 2, 3, 4, 5 hours out of their day to create valuable content for a brand for $0? It doesn't make sense. With that being said, like, with that mindset, I've always challenged my clients to really step away from asking for free work, for asking for in-kind partnerships, for asking for content in exchange for gifting. Best practice in 2023, you're paying for the content that you're looking for from a creator. And what helps is expectations then. You know what you're going to get. You're paying for specific deliverables. You're paying, some of my clients now, I have targets. Like I have targets I have to hit in my contracts sometimes. And I think that's fair enough. You have KPIs, I can have KPIs. I think that's fair. If everyone has an expectation going into it, I have a certain amount of posts, I've got to hit a certain amount of impressions. Fair enough. Like we're all working towards like a specific message, but let's do that together and let's get compensated fairly for it. And do I think that influencers are paid handsomely? Yes. But to my other point, we have 17 job descriptions in one. We're doing so much that's not just showing up as talent on the day. And also, where at least you asked about my rate card, like where my rates are reflected now in 2023 is with the understanding that I was an early adopter and that I have been in this space for over a decade and that I know where the industry is heading and that I know best practices and that I'm going to be professional. And I think all of that comes with age and with experience. So I don't think that my rates should be the same as someone that just got into being a creator a year ago, even if they have the same, if not more reach. I think some of it also is a little bit intangible. And maybe not everyone agrees with that, but that's how I see my rates. And I think it's based on more than just a number, especially when it comes to followers.
I think it's a really weird industry because you have to maintain this aspirational lifestyle.
Totally.
Right? Like you have to want to, like, people are following you. Like, I'm interested in what you're eating. I'm interested in what you're wearing. And you have to afford to live. And you can't have a second job. Like, this is truly a full-time job. Like, you just outlined what you do and what you do in a morning for 2 posts. Like, it's crazy. But you have to live and you have to be able to also afford and support the lifestyle, because not everything you can do is like free clothes that's sent to you and free food. Like, you have to also buy what's trendy. You also buy what's hot. And you also have to make your way into the standard of influencer that you are. And that comes with having an aspirational or inspirational lifestyle.
There are brands and exceptions to the rule. I think you would agree with this too. There's certain, what do we like to call them? Well, I'm thinking of the word. There's certain vanity clients that it's okay, in my opinion, to do free work for. And that is if the vanity client is going to be basically positioning on your feed in your little magazine as a brand that then other brands would be excited about and want to create work for you.
Totally.
And that's probably the only exception. And there's a few brands, and I'll tell you offline, brands that I would work for free. But there are very few exceptions to that rule.
I'd work for Chanel for free.
I know a lot of people work for high-end luxury brands for free. They, like, those influencers are not always getting paid by Chanel's, Dior's, Fendi's. A lot of it is gifting. A lot of it is in kind. Yeah. And to be fair, I think that's fair enough. Like, if that's something you're passionate about and luxury is like a great position for your followers, all the power to you. Get that fabulous bag.
It's positioning. And that, like, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're running your own agency. Like, you've got deliverables, you have a range of mediums, and you're selling your expertise.
Totally.
Like, that's more, and you're working with multiple clients.
Yeah.
Like, you're more or less an agency. Like, it makes sense that you understand the value of positioning, and it takes often big clients want to know what other big clients you've worked with, and it's hard to do that. But on the flip side, what makes it tough for me as the agency rep that's brokering it is, I want to have the conversation with my clients where I'm advocating for the influencer. I see the work that you do. I know what it takes to stay relevant, to maintain popularity, to keep your followers engaged, and how much tireless work it is. You're constantly going to events and meeting new people every day. It's exhausting. I can only imagine. But it's hard as the broker when I'm going into these agreements and we have maybe it's a service in kind, and that's typically what it is. It's not, straight free. But when I'm advocating for payment and then the influencers come in and then they're like, yeah, you know what, actually, like, we'll just do it for some whatever the service is. And I think that it's case by case, but I see it so much that I think that it hurts the industry more than it helps. Even if there's a way to charge at a fair rate or a discounted rate, or to show or to be very specific on what your rate card usually is. The deliverable is tied to the actual price point, because moving forward, it makes it very difficult for me to have that conversation seriously with corporate when they just think they can buy you off with, you know, a facial or some Botox.
Yeah, I do get that. I know that it's really challenging, and I appreciate that from the agency side, because I've heard that a lot from a lot of mentors and friends in that position, is that because it's the Wild West and because everybody's rate card looks insanely different and the numbers vary from the thousands, it's really challenging to position that to a client. My job as an influencer is to make sure that my rates encompass the experience the brand is going to have with me. And so that's why I think I've always been able to have pretty competitive rates in the industry. But you better be rising to the occasion if you're asking for $10,000 for a brand deal. You better be on the ball. You better be hitting those deliverables. You better be hitting those targets, or else what is it all for? So I so see I have so much appreciation for that, because I know it can be a hard sell. And I do think it's a case by case basis, because I think every single influencer comes at it from a different perspective. Totally. And it only hurts the industry when influencers, especially larger macro influencers and or mid-level influencers, are working for free. Like, that is only hurting all of us.
Totally.
So best case, you're being open with your peers, you're having conversations with your creators that are friends, and you're saying, hey, what are you charging? Making sure that everyone's staying at that competitive rate and keeping that going.
When do you decide to walk away from an interest? Like, I don't want to say walk away, because I'm sure you get tons of interest. Like, there's just like anything else. Like, you know, I get interest that doesn't make sense for my brand. But when let's say it does align on paper, what red flags do you see to decide to not move forward?
If it makes sense on paper and I decide not to move forward, it's usually probably one of three things. Like, one, I know the content won't perform. And I won't put my clients in a position where I know that if I create a video and it just like won't hit, that I'll even move forward with it, because that's not going to work for me and it's not going to work for the brand. Second is if they don't align on my contract terms, which I've had to come to terms with, like if they aren't going to give me the usage I want, or if they're really pushing for exclusivity that they're not going to pay for, like those are things you have to be willing to walk away from. And then the third is, would I be proud of this content a year from now? Like, is this something that I'm going to look back on and say, I'm so glad I got to partner with that epic brand and bring that to life? And I have examples where I absolutely nowadays feel that way. Like, if I look at my feed now, I'm like, YouTube, NBA, Disney, like Scroll, Scotiabank, Scroll. Like, I'm like, yeah, I'm proud of this content. I'm proud of what I'm creating. And that sits well with me for like the long term of my career.
That was a great point. What suggestions do you have, or I'll ask again looking at you. What suggestions do you have? I can't remember the whole sentence. What suggestions do you have to help businesses create a better working relationship with influencers?
I think actually having conversations with influencers and bringing them into briefing calls, bringing them into town halls, bringing them into lunch and learns, having larger conversations beyond just an email chain about a campaign. And like I said, that has changed in recent years, and I've seen a lot more interest from agencies and brands bringing influencers into the conversation. But it is shocking how much everybody likes to do without the influencer in the room, when ultimately we're the ones selling the damn product and creating the content ultimately. And I've been challenging a lot of my clients now, like in my consulting role, to do more in-house content creation, like have an in-house production team and actually create content from the brand perspective, because UGC is great and you can leverage user-generated content, you can leverage influencers, but whatever happened to just like brand storytelling from the brand's perspective in a non-commercial way? I would use an example like a Revolve. I think they do it really well, where their in-house production team is so active. They're always coming out with new content. Actually, an even more modern example that outperforms Revolve would be a Skims. And I look at their feed, they must be posting 4 4 to 6 pieces of original in-house branded content every single day. Sorry, not even branded, like branded for Skims, but organic for Skims, in-house created. And I'm like, that's impressive. That's how you're creating retention. Like I'm scrolling and I'm constantly seeing, oh, there's a new drop. Oh, there's a new piece. Oh, Kim's in this. Oh, great. And you're so involved in the brand and it's so highly active. And that's really exciting to me. And that's where I think brands have to go. They have to be so active online. They have to come up with their own visual identity and they need to start telling that story. Like as much as they can rely on me, I don't know your brand inside out the same way that you do if you're working in-house. Of course, I can try to understand it, but I think there's a ton of value if that storytelling is coming from inside the walls.
I couldn't agree more. I think in-house, I prefer when I like from the agency side, I like to get the clients to a point where they're bringing someone in-house because no one can tell a company's story better, more consistently once the strategy has been developed than the internal team, because third party is just slower. And especially when we talk about like how fast paced the internet is, for you to be able to respond to a trend, to get out a piece of content, that's not coming from an influencer unless the influencer is being given the freedom to do that upon when they're creating the content piece. But if you miss that, you missed a major opportunity. And especially in the digital world, you have such a small window to go viral. Like if you are one day late or you just miss that hot window by 2 or 3 hours, you could be missing millions of dollars. And depending on the size of your company, $1 billion with a B.
And also impressions.
Oh my God. Eyeballs.
Yeah.
We're in the economy of eyeballs. Like at the end of the day, you're measuring dollars, but marketing is so random that it's really about eyeballs.
I don't know if you saw this example, but I think it's a great one when the halftime show happened and then it must have 20 million views, something insane, but it's the little gummy bear swinging from the walls with all the white marshmallows. Did you see this on TikTok? Embodying Rihanna's show. And I thought, wow. And that went live like during the next commercial break. That's timely content.
It gives me marketing goosebumps.
Totally. That is timely, like be on top of the trends. And it's sort of to what we were chatting about before, but because these brands are living in fear, they're never timely with their posts. And then they're always retroactively trying to be a part of the conversation.
Doesn't work.
And then it's awkward.
It doesn't work because like we've moved on. We're on the next issue.
Did you see all these agencies posting like when Barbie released the Barbie kind of like photos of all the cast and then all the agencies and brands were like following suit and posting the Barbie. And then you see brands posting that a week later and you're kind of thinking, cringe.
No, it died. But even on the Super Bowl note, before we move on, like I found Rihanna's, quick pop of the Fenty palette was great. It was so seamless. She did it with so much swagger. It felt so authentic to her brand, to the Fenty makeup brand. Like, hold up, gonna take a second here out of my Super Bowl performance to blot the oil. But it was so funny that same Super Bowl weekend, I also watched a UFC fight. I know it might seem off brand, but I really like UFC fighting. And at the end of the fight, the guy was exhausted. It was pretty much like a death match, and they hand him this can. He wasn't drinking it. It's empty. And as he's out of breath, he's awkwardly holding a Monster can. And it was just funny because it was 2 major sporting events where they had product placement, and it shows you what strategy can do versus what forced down your throat corporate marketing contract looks like, and how I actually don't want to buy Monster. I never did. I wasn't their target market, but now I'll never forget that versus when I think of Fenty, I get that sly smile. I'm like, she's such a badass. I love that she took her spot to be promote.
Absolutely. And it comes back to intention. I think when we see Rihanna opening up the blot and using that moment to be thanks for watching, it's almost like we cheer with you as opposed to making fun of you.
Yes.
And I think more marketing needs to be that way and I love this. We don't hate ads. We hate bad ads.
Yes.
Especially on TikTok, especially in the world of 2023. So when we see Rihanna with Fenty doing that kind of timeless, iconic moment, we think yes, and we clap along with her. Versus the Monster example, we sit there and say, this is gross and cringe, not for me.
And to tie it all in, it's because she's a creator, right? Like, she understands the power of well-placed marketing. And you're so right. It's not even that we're so overstimulated with ads that when a big brand with a lot of money just takes an L, we just want to rip them because like
Totally.
we're so sick of our time being taken. Like, respect it. We want to be sold to properly. So respect our time, respect our attention, respect our eyeballs. Before we get into kind of the next kind of topic, I want you to quickly explain.
Having dry lip syndrome, sorry.
It's okay. It's a quick Fenty spot.
What is this? I don't know. Okay, thank you.
Oh, it's NARS.
Thank you, NARS.
So can you quickly explain in your own words how you differentiate UGC, micro-influencers, macro-influencers? And if there's any other terms you think I'm missing in that?
No, I think that's fair. A user-generated content creator is someone who would create basically branded content, but from the lens of the corporate company. So they're not embodying the video with their name and likeness. They're embodying the video with the brand's kind of intention and name and likeness. So I guess that would be the key differentiator. Obviously, an influencer, micro or macro, would be leveraging their own name and likeness to tell that story. In some ways, I guess a UGC creator is almost like a filler actor in some ways. Like, that's one way to look at it, because they're really just embodying the script and the ideas of the brand versus their own. Influencer, obviously, everything should be coming from their intentions, their perspective, of course, with key messaging, but like it's using their brand name and likeness to basically sell a product. Micro, this may have changed, but to me, micro is like 10K and under, 5K and under on TikTok or Instagram. And then a macro creator is really different in Canada than it is in the US. A macro creator in the US is really someone that has over 1 million followers. But a macro creator in Canada is probably someone who has closer to like 500,000, maybe even a little bit less, just because we have such a smaller territory here. So it is different, but yeah, macro in the US is like 1 million and up.
No, interesting. And when do you think each category more or less is the most strategic?
Yeah, I think if you're a small business and you're just getting started leveraging influencer, a great place to start is with micro influencers. Micro influencers are really powerful because they have really typically engaged communities. It's even sometimes just like a friend. Like, in some ways, like, you are actually definitely a micro influencer, and you're someone that if you're showing a certain bag or wearing a certain outfit or doing a certain thing, it holds a lot of weight because you have so much trust in your audience, with your audience, because it is community based and because it's so small.
And they know me.
And they know you.
Like they actually know me.
And they actually know you. And it kind of goes back to the power of like word of mouth marketing. And that's why I think micro influencers have this like really beautiful power. Macro influencers are great for awareness plays. If you're really just trying to get your brand out there and talk about this brand and kind of create a little buzz around it, that's a great time to leverage a macro influencer. I think if you're looking for a conversion play, that could be a great time to leverage a user-generated consumer, because you're getting all your key messaging from the brand's perspective, and then you can leverage that as an ad and put paid dollars behind it with a link driving to purchase. So again, it's all a case by case, but I think there's a place for everyone to play here, which is fun.
Totally. And my knowledge tells me that UGC is doing really well on TikTok from a business perspective, because I've had the same experience where when the business is posting tons of different people on their feed, the algorithm doesn't know how to sort it. So it's not Tori Webster on Tori Webster's page using NARS lip gloss. You're welcome, NARS. It's when NARS posts it, it's Camille Moore, their UGC creator. So it's always Camille. Does that...
100%.
And I think that's probably an additional good differentiator.
Maybe like a brand ambassador, sort of.
Because it's good for the algorithm.
Totally.
It like keeps it consistent. But I think UGCs are also really great for pushing product opposed to service. So when you lip gloss again, if you're trying to sell a lip gloss or a self tanner, or like having a UGC person is good for finding like different ways to push the product. When it's a service, I find that's where micro, macro are a little bit more strategic, and it depends how big your service is. So if you are Magic Cuts, you know, you've locations all over, a macro influencer is great. But when it's hyper local and you can only service a really small community, macro can still be really great. Like, you probably still have a ton of followers in Toronto and the GTA.
I personally do, but I agree with you. I think that's when it has to go back to analytics, and you need to figure out if that macro person actually, like, Toronto's my largest city in terms of following, but not every Toronto local creator may have that stat. So you definitely need to make sure you know who you're leveraging. But I agree with you. I think when it's hyper targeted, that's a great opportunity to use a local micro creator, someone who's really in touch with their community and is going to move the needle in that way.
And it also depends on how you're positioning your brand and business, right? Like, we've worked together on some, they're local, but they're really trying to position themselves as more national. Maybe they have plans to be national, or maybe they've just, this is a business with a really big budget, and they're trying to be seen as a place to see or to go to in Toronto when you're kind of traveling into that city. And that's also where macro can be really strategic.
And I think micro is just ultimately going to be cheaper. Like, if it's a dollar thing, I think people get caught up potentially with the macro approach just because it can be really expensive. But if you've got those dollar bills, then
go all in. Well, and it comes down to your strategy, and that's where what you're saying, like, bring you in earlier in the conversation, or even just bring in someone that's whether it's a consultant or a consultant that's also an influencer. I mean, double bonus.
Totally.
But I see a lot of businesses that have zero intention of getting outside of the small pocket they service. That's not a place to necessarily pay Tori Webster. It's a place to get Tori Webster's brain to come in and strategize, but it's, again, aligned with their goals, because are you going to be able to provide them what they're looking to achieve? If they get a ton of calls from the next big major city over and they're not interested in servicing it, that's a big waste of time, money, and resources, and your brand.
Absolutely.
Right? So what suggestions or advice do you have for people wanting to get into the influencing space?
I guess the biggest thing, I've been seeing this all over TikTok, and I relate to it so much, and you and I privately had this conversation, and it's just accurate, is being okay with being cringe. And I think that people are so afraid to put themselves out there. I mean, I guess I'm just lucky. I've always just said ego to the wind, and listen, now I drive a Porsche, and people can laugh at me if they want online, but who's really winning? You know what I mean?
Totally.
It's like, be cringe because
golf clap.
Because it's fine. You know what I mean? Like, get over yourself. Like, this is meant to be fun. Like, creating is fun, storytelling is fun, community is fun, networking is fun, marketing is fun. Like, all of it is actually a really joyful job. There's not a day that I wake up bored. There's not a day that I wake up thinking, oh, I have such a lame job. Like, no, in fact, I think I have one of the coolest jobs in the world.
Totally.
And I think what stops people is fear, and then, like, embarrassment of, like, being online. But for what? Like, for what? For the 5 minutes or the 10 minutes that you are just growing your following and people don't know who you are and they're sending your video making fun of you? Great, you're still helping my engagement. All PR is good PR. Thank you for supporting my video.
But even from the outside, like, I've always been a supporter from the outside looking in. Video is somewhat new to me, and I've always had like this shock and awe of, like, I mean, I know you on a deep personal level, but, like, this is really you. Like, you really are larger than life. Like, you are always, I don't even want to call it performing. Like, you just are a performance. Like, you have great bravado. But I completely agree with you. One of the best things that I've done for myself is create video, and I don't care about the negativity that's happening, because I get so much joy from the new people that we get to connect with and all of the kind things that people have to say, because it's enjoyable. But I think kind of what you're saying, not to put words in your mouth, is be aware that that's happening, but if you really want to do it, don't allow that to be the reason you don't. And recently I read this I don't want to say it's a stat, it was kind of more like an article that there's just not enough content, and we spend so much time on our phones that people are just hungry for good content. So if you can provide valuable content that's engaging, you got to do it, because there is a shortage. Like, influencing is saturated, but good quality content that moves the dial is there's no shortage of demand, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Completely. And I agree with that. And I think what is misunderstood potentially is there's so much opportunity to go around, and there's so much work to go around. There's so many brands. I mean, you know this better than anyone, that need help with their marketing and with their pivoting and how they're going to show up online. So yeah, like there's room for everyone. It's a creative job. It's a business focused job if you want it to be. And it also doesn't have to be. I always say that too. Like, I'm 80% business and 20% creative, but most creators are the opposite. They're 80% creative and 20% business. But then fine, so hire a team that's going to manage the business side and be the creator. And either way, you get to flex different muscles and be super multifaceted, which I think is the most exciting part of the job. It's not sitting at a desk every day and clocking in a 9 to 5. It's every day is a new challenge and a new story and a new angle. And that's exciting.
But I think that it probably seems a little bit like it's just you can't separate it, but I think that you've got something to share to someone that's wanting to get into it, that almost it's not as glamorous as it seems, you know, like almost.
That is accurate.
Like, maybe.
Here's what's not glamorous about being an influencer. It's a very lonely job that happens in a silos. Unless you are massive and you have a huge team helping you create content and you're showing up on like commercial level sets, 99% of creators, especially in Canada, are doing it all themselves. And so it's a very self-motivated job. You need to wake up every single day and be excited to storytell and excited to create. And I'd be lying if I said that that doesn't get to you some days. When you're fighting with an algorithm that's fighting against you, when you're putting out a ton of videos but nothing's hitting, when you feel like you've hit a creative burnout or a bit of a wall, or you don't have any new business on the horizon and it feels like you got to chase clients for a new deal. Like, that's the stuff that people don't see, and that's like the true entrepreneurship of it that I think people don't necessarily understand. And yeah, that's with the caveat that this is the most fun, incredible, like, engaging job that I could possibly have. But no job is perfect, and there's obviously some downfalls.
Where do you get your creativity or your inspiration?
I get my inspiration. It's interesting. I guess a few different places. I get my inspiration from film. Mostly because I think I'm just a cinephile and I really enjoy traditional media. So whether that's like a storyline that I get excited about or like a fashion piece that I get excited about, I also get a lot of inspiration from podcasts. That's obviously only been in the last 4 or 5 years, but something about being able to escape in a podcast, I think, also leaves room for creativity. I mean, I've already mentioned Smartless on this podcast, but I think it's worth noting is like finding places where you feel escapism and can laugh and be light, I think allows you to be more creative. It's like you can't be creative when you are so strict on yourself or when you're so stringent and being like, I need to come up with a viral video. That's when the video is going to like honestly shit the bed and flop and be horrible. It's like when you leave space for joy, for fun, for comedy, for maybe making a mistake, for maybe not taking it too seriously. It's always the random videos that you film in 5 seconds that pop off, or the ones that are like just a little off the cuff or just a little bit thoughtless. There's something, when we're trying to be too calculated and too strategic, I think the algorithm and or the consumer can see through that. So it's finding a way to just show up and really be like our lightest version of ourselves, or that's the way I like to approach it.
What quickly are some of your favorite podcasts other than Smart File?
I love Smartless.
Oh, Smartless. Sorry.
What else do I love? I like the creator Tinks. She has a podcast called It's Me Tinks. I think that's
everyone loves her.
Yeah, I think, and she's a great example of like an influencer embracing the life of an influencer and being cool about that and being like, yeah, like, here's my podcast, here's my book, like, here's all these extensions of me and how you can buy into my lifestyle, but in the most authentic way. So what a great case study.
No, totally. 2 more questions, guys, and then we'll wrap it. How do you suggest...
Sweaty, wow.
Oh, you need some Fenty.
I need a blotting.
How do you suggest influencers and brands make strategic decisions to do a campaign that's on brand, that's not just a check or a person with a ton of followers?
I think, again, it goes back to intention. Why are you creating this partnership and why are you creating this campaign? Is it a transactional post or is it going to be a long-term ambassadorship and partnership? Is it trying to create conversion? Like, are you getting click for purchase or having someone show up to a certain store and purchase a certain thing? Is it a giveaway? Like, are you going to get your product in the hands of certain people and create new customers? Is it an awareness play? You just want to introduce your brand to the world and have everyone be excited by it. That's probably step 1, is figuring out your strategic intention for running a digital campaign. I think a lot of brands now get into digital marketing because they are just behind the 8 ball and they realize everyone else is doing it and they just want to have a presence online, but they don't actually know how to show up as themselves. They're just kind of copy pasting what's happening on other brand platforms and trying to identify what's working and what's not, but then it's never going to feel real or authentic. So I think just like really coming up with like measurable touch points of why you're doing this, and then also tracking success that way. Like, if you're saying it's about conversion, then making sure that all the analytics you're getting on the background or on the back end are showing you all the conversion and presenting that to your boss and saying, hey, influencers actually work.
I'm laughing because it's like, it's just, you would think it's just such a step 1 of, if we're measuring conversions, let's just make sure that the conversion tracking system is set up.
You would be shocked.
No, I know. And it's because that's why I'm laughing. Like, it's just hilarious. Like,
or if brands don't even follow up for insights, like, that's part of it too. There are clients that it goes live and then you never hear from them again, aside from getting paid. And it's like, oh, you didn't want to see. I mean, best practice, you should be sending that as the creator anyways, a little wrap-up report of what all went down. But if you don't and no one's following up, then what? Like, or is no one else considering what is happening on the back end and how things are performing?
And like how you're actually moving the needle.
Totally.
I agree. I think that what's weird about marketing right now is big brands are using bifurcated strategies where they're leveraging influencers that can still be big numbers wise, but aren't traditionally famous, like how celebrity endorsements kind of used to be, so that you kind of feel more like Pepsi's talking to me, right? Like, I feel connected with Pepsi because, you know, Pepsi and Tinks did a partnership. They didn't, but like, Tinks is my person, right? So like, when my dad goes and buys Pepsi, like, he doesn't realize that, like, you know, Pepsi and Tinks are together. So like, I feel like a connection to the brand. I think that there's still, which I like, and I think that that's strategic. I like that too. And that's like where it should go. But it's interesting that there's still this idea that it has to be LeBron James. It has to be a Tiger Woods. It has to be a Cindy Crawford or a Kim Kardashian and I think that, to go back to like, we're sick of being duped by marketing. Like, we know that LeBron James isn't eating McDonald's. Like, we know that. So it's, I think it's, McDonald's is probably actually a better example, because McDonald's did like the Travis Scott meals. Like, those are brilliant and they flew off the shelf. Like, it's better than doing a major brand partnership. So what I want to tie up what you're saying is, big isn't always better, right? It's not, you don't need to go for the massive celebrity to sell the product. I think that more strategic niche strategies to connect with communities is probably a better way to sell products.
I completely agree. And I guess to enforce that belief is that I think influencers are the new wave of celebrity anyways.
Totally.
Like, this is who Gen Z is looking up to. This is who Gen Z is influenced by. This is who Gen Z and cusp millennials are looking to for advice, for fashion expertise, to buy. Like, and I'm sure as a consumer, I always think this as well, because I always consider the experience of the consumer when it comes to digital marketing. And I look at my own habits as a great touch point, and I'm sure you do as well when you're doing case studies, because when I'm scrolling on Instagram, at least once a week, and we're talking at least, there's something at random. I'll use this example. I was watching a video last night. There was a girl who was just doing a regular get ready with me, but she was wearing the most insane robe. I was like, this robe, I need this robe. I need this robe. I go to the comment section. This was not an ad. This was just an organic get ready with me. Scrolling.
Was it Valeria put the one with the eyes on it?
No, it was a Missoni robe that this girl had just been wearing before she put her actual outfit on. The comment section leads, oh, robe is Missoni, da-da-da. I'm on then a Missoni website looking at a $400 robe. And I'm like, sure, maybe Missoni will never know that they got a new customer because this random girl, I didn't, but let's say I did.
Okay.
Let's say I did, because there's many examples of when I've purchased from
Same.
TikTok. So let's say I bought, I just couldn't fathom the $400, but let's say I bought the $400 robe.
It's a different day. You had a bigger contract.
Exactly. On another day, I would have been like, sure, whatever. So I didn't buy the robe, but let's say I bought the robe. What a great example of how untrackable TikTok marketing is. Missoni would never be able to know that Tori Webster found Missoni through this literal random get ready with me video that wasn't even calling out Missoni. She was just organically wearing it. I had to search it through the comment section to figure out where to go. And now I'm on their site clicking through to buy a $400 robe. So I guess the mindset for brands needs to be less focused on fear of like creating impressions and conversion and all of these things, and know that there is so much confidence in what's happening on that platform organically because of the way consumers are leveraging the platform, which is they love the stories, they love to get involved, they love to search the comment section, and they love to click through to purchase. Yeah. So don't be scared.
They like the rawness of it. And I like, even to give an example of Kim Kardashian, like she's right now an ambassador for Balenciaga, Dolce & Gabbana, and Stuart Weitzman. I'm not buying any of those products because Kim is on the ad. I'd buy the Stuart Weitzman boots because some girl, regardless of size, because I also follow a lot of big macro like fashion influencers who's posting it, whether it's in a curated post, whether it's in a get ready with me, love the boots, see them styled, see myself wearing them. Mm-hmm. I don't see Kim Kardashian on a styled billboard and say, you know what? I see myself there. Like, you see yourself.
It's me.
It's me. I want to buy your blazer because I think that it would look great on me.
Totally.
You don't really think about it that way, but like you like other people's things because you want to wear it.
Exactly.
So you have to see it in an environment that you actually see yourself. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's a really good wrap up to that question. What is your biggest prediction for influencing? Where do you think it's going? I want to say like, I feel like 2 years is just way too long of a window, but where do you just think influencing is going, period? Let's make that the question.
More platforms, more content is where I think it's going. I think we're going to be welcoming Lemonade soon to Canada. I think every creator in their right mind should be jumping on every new platform and every new opportunity. I mean, if we look at the TikTok example, didn't exist 2-3 years ago, now makes up 50% of my annual income. I think if we're looking at it strategically as business owners and as creators, we always need to be looking at what's next. As much as we, of course, need to be on top of trends and staying like in market and creating value, it's challenging to be in our position and in the marketer's position because it always is a constant question of what's next. A constant question. And I'll say this. And I really believe this to my core because I've been asked this so many times. Oh, what are you going to do when your influencer gig dies or you can't be a creator anymore? And I say this. I believe in storytelling. I've obviously always believed in storytelling. I grew up a dancer. That was a form of storytelling. I then became an actor. That was a form of storytelling. I then became a influencer, and that was a form of storytelling. I became a creative consultant. That was another form of storytelling. My job is not changing. My skills are not changing. I'm just, every time something new comes around, I'm pivoting. I'm saying, how can I now take that storytelling that I have and shift it and put it in a new perspective? So my job is not changing, and it's definitely not going anywhere. It's just expanding, and it's just on a wave.
Marketing is storytelling.
Exactly. We're fucking storytellers. God.
What's your next career move?
So in the words of Northwest, I'd like to be everything. But I really do believe that. I've always seen myself, and I think you would align with this as well, as like a true multi-hyphenate. I don't like to put a name on what I do. I don't like to say I'm an actor. I don't like to say I'm only a influencer. I don't like to say I'm only a creator or a consultant. I think that in this ever-changing landscape, we're allowed to have some flexibility, and I'd like to keep that flexibility. So I'd like to be everything. Was that a fair answer?
That was awesome.
Thank you, Camille. Thank you.